You found a place to belong here in the Circle of Friends. I'm Missy, and I am so excited to have my husband Ned here with me. Hey, Ned.
Hey there, Missy, and I'm excited to be here too, to be honest with you.
I'm glad to hear you say that because when I first asked you, I know you were a little bit like, what? I haven't done radio. I haven't been in the pulpit for a while. What do you want? What am I going to talk about? But I assured you that it would be easy, right?
Oh, it's a joy.
Good, good. I know you. I know your heart. I know you have a lot to share, and that's truly what being around the table means, is that you know God, you love God, and you are trying to live out your life according to His Word. And one of the things that we've been talking about this week is something called lifestyle evangelism. And I like that because if you've been a believer for any length of time, you know that evangelism, quote unquote, is very important, or sharing Christ with someone is very important, and that you have a responsibility to do it. I think for a lot of believers, that is a massive mountain or hill to climb. First of all, it's a little overwhelming. It might be even a little scary. You know, I got to go try to tell. What if they ask me a question? What if I don't know the Bible that well? I don't know what to do. What do I do? What do I do? I get that feeling and I understand it, but I believe that there is a way to share with people, and you can kind of surmount that mountain or even lop it off at the ground, because if you know Christ, you have a story to share. You know how you came into relationship with Him. You know what your life was like before you knew Christ. You know what your life is like afterwards. It makes it a very, very easy, doable kind of thing to do.
Not only, Missy, can we share our story, but sometimes we can share a story of an event in our life. And I think sometimes we need to be mindful of those type of things that we experience in life. Are our eyes open to what God is doing?
Yes, I love that. The opportunity. What is God doing? Having your eyes open. And just for background, I want to remind our listeners that, Ned, you pastored for 25 to 30 years. I don't even remember now what it was. You're not currently pastoring, but you still have that pastor's heart, that shepherd's heart. And what you do for your job is you transport vehicles, correct?
That's right.
You haul RVs and trucks, and you have a little tow car, and you kind of go cross country. So you travel a lot.
From place to place. And just last week, I was delivering an RV to Orange Park, Florida. And these are expensive vehicles that we transport. And so when we take a new RV to a dealership, they have to go through a check-in process where they make sure we did not wreck the vehicle or trash the vehicle on our trip. And sometimes these check-ins are relatively easy, 15, 20 minutes. They do a walk around. They deal with any other peripheral issues with the RV later, and they let you go on your way. And I was really anxious to get on my way after delivering this RV because I didn't have anything in my future to grab or to deliver, and I was going to deadhead 900 and some miles home. So I was anxious to get started. But this particular check-in took quite some time. I ended up being there almost 3 hours. And I found a place to sit around a little table in kind of like a lobby lounge area there in the RV dealership. And I was sitting there and a lady came by. She looked at me and she said, "You should put a smile on your face."
That's unusual for you because you usually have a smile on your face.
Well, I guess I was a little bit disgruntled that it was taking me a little longer to check in, but she passed the way. And in the meantime, as I was sitting there, I was playing on my phone and I was watching a YouTube video of a radio host interviewing Don Henley about his singing the song Desperado. And it was kind of humorous that he was sharing that story. And I began to kind of chuckle to myself about that. And the lady came back and she looked at me and she said, "You're smiling now."
Yeah, again, an opportunity.
That's correct. And she sat down. And that began about an hour's worth of misery in my life.
Oh, my goodness.
This lady had on a mask, and that's fine in these days. We understand it. And she had a very heavy Spanish accent. She was a Mexican-American, a sweet lady, but she began to tell me her life story. And one of the first things that she's told me was that I had a face like her father-in-law. And I thought that was a compliment. And then she said, "He hates me."
Wow. Wow, that's really kind of interesting.
Well, that began her telling me just a lot of stuff that happened in her life. She had served in the Navy, and I thanked her for her service. Her husband had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I thanked her for his service. And she had a very hard story to tell about a lot of painful issues in her life. And to be perfectly honest with you, Missy, I wasn't beginning to get a clue that I was going to have an opportunity to share Jesus, but I should have got that immediately. But I sat there just wishing this interaction would end.
Oh, well, I'm sure that's not unusual. I think we've all been in situations where we think, whoa, why am I here? Or being impatient to get on with whatever, the rest of our day, or people who maybe we run across for whatever reason. Now, the thing that strikes me about this is that I'm sure she was difficult to understand with the mask and her, the accent going on. And even some of the things that she was saying to you, maybe the words like, you're like my father-in-law, you look like my father-in-law, he hates me. You might think, oh, well, okay, that's a wall. She really doesn't want anything to do with me. And yet she's opening up to you about her life. So that tells me that your response, regardless of what was going on the inside, was very open, or she wouldn't have done it.
Well, that's perhaps true, but I still wasn't getting it yet. and at one point, God allowed this thunderstorm, that Florida often gets in the afternoon, to begin a rain shower, and my tow car's sitting outside. And when the rain starts, I thought, oh, this is my opportunity. I think I better go out and see if my windows are shut. And I went out, and sure enough, my driver's side window was open, and I went and I cranked it shut, and I shut it. And even though it was raining, I kind of walked back in slowly, to be honest with you, hoping this woman would have gotten up and left.
So your exit strategy, did it work?
No, it didn't work. But I still wasn't seeing what God was going to do. I saw no opportunity, and I really wasn't looking for an opportunity at this time. And I sat back down, and she continued her story, and it was a hard story to listen to. She loved her husband. Her husband, they'd been married 38 years, and a set of circumstances had come into her father-in-law's life, and he had to move in with them, which made it extremely unpleasant for her.
Wow. This is something I really want to just kind of interrupt your story about a bit, because here's the thing. We say this and we mean this. Every person has a story, and most people have a hunger and a desire actually to tell it. And in the culture and the world we live in, not a lot of people listen anymore, if you notice. And I think that's true. Or even, we play a lot of pretend, like we try to put on a mask. Everything's fine. Everything's perfect. You think about when you go into church, hi, how you doing? Doing great. And is it great? It may not be. Everything's fine. Is it fine? Maybe underneath you're struggling with something, but you don't want to share that or show that. And that's in the body. I think even people out in the world, will sometimes wear a mask, and not the kind that covers your mouth and your nose in these days. A mask that says, I'm good. Everything's fine with me. I'm not going to show you my brokenness because I'm afraid to. Do you understand what I mean when I say that?
That's true. And we look for opportunities perhaps to get down below the surface in someone's life. And I need to confess to you and to our listeners that I was having a hard time really doing that on this occasion. I kept glancing up to the counter where the clipboard of my check-in materials were, and from my seat I could see across the top of the counter, and I could see the keys that I'd left there to the vehicle. And as long as I saw the keys, I knew that I was still waiting for someone to check me in. And the more times that I glanced away from this woman to see those keys, the more painful for me this issue became. But God was about to do something, and it was curious how all that came about. And frankly, I kept glancing at the keys and feeling guilty that I was glancing to see if the keys had been moved, knowing that would speed up my exit from this opportunity. And frankly, it was difficult to watch this woman tell her story.
Yes.
But she was just about ready to say something that would open up the door, maybe in our second segment, to today, I can tell you how all that happened. But I was listening and I really wasn't looking for an opportunity. God was about to slap me up alongside of the head and surprise me with the opportunity that she brought to me. But at one time, she shared with me, and she was talking about the unique relationship her husband had with her father-in-law who hated her, and yet she was married to her husband and committed to him, and her father-in-law being in the house presented all kinds of difficulties. And she looked at me at a point and she said these words, "Been married 38 years, and I don't think my husband ever told me I love you once."
Wow.
Well, maybe in our second segment, I can let our listeners in on what that led me to share with her. But at that moment, when she said those words, immediately I knew why I had sat there for 45 minutes listening to her.
Wow.
And the opportunity that God had put before me. And it all came together in that one moment when she said those words.
This is an incredible story, and I'm so happy that you're telling it. And actually, it is time for a break, so we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back. Listener, you'll want to hear the rest of this. It's pretty exciting how God works and gives opportunity even when we don't see it. Thanks for joining us. We'll be right back here in the Circle of Friends.
Looking for ways to change up your living space? Stop by Village Gift Barn and view our wide selection of house and home items. Need some tips on how to pull together a room? One of our talented home decor staff will help you put together the perfect arrangement for your home. Located in the heart of Amish country on State Route 39 in Berlin. Village Gift Barn. Never ordinary, we promise.
All things into the corners of each heart. Everything is in your hands, from the cradle to the stars. And you take our dreams and all we hope to be. Through joy and tears, pain and laughter, we know you'll never leave. Nothing better in this world that we could ever find. Oh, your truth gives life. You came to set the captives free, and you've opened up our eyes. Everything is in your hands, from the cradle to the stars. You take our dreams and all we hope to be. Through joy and tears, pain and laughter, we know you'll never leave. Set the captives free, and you open
We're back here in the Circle of Friends. You're with Ned and Missy, actually. My husband is here with me this week, and we are talking about evangelism and what that looks like. Lifestyle evangelism, when we walk through our life with our eyes wide open to see the opportunities that God brings us. Now, Ned, you're in the midst of telling us this story that just happened to you recently as you were delivering vehicles to Florida. You went to a dealer, you had to sit and wait for your vehicle to be checked in so you could get on your way. And in the midst of all that, a lady comes and begins a conversation with you, which she's telling you her life story. And like, I've been there, so I understand this. Maybe getting a little anxious, maybe a little bit like, "Whoa, come on, lady, come on, guys, get the vehicle ready so I could leave. I need to get on with my day." And really, more or less, it's not even so much that you weren't making the connection, but you weren't seeing what God was doing in the moment. And I love that you said God slapped you upside the head, because He did, didn't He?
That's exactly what happened. And to be completing the story, this lady is actually a customer at the RV dealership. She had come to buy a camper trailer or to look at it for a camper trailer. And in the midst of her telling me this story, and by this time we were 35, 40, 45 minutes into a conversation, I had tried to exit it by going out and seeing if my windows were closed in my car when a sudden rainstorm hit. But she said these words. She said, 38 years of marriage, and I don't think my husband has ever told me I love you. Well, immediately I said to her, "Can I tell you a story?" Now, I had sit there and I'd listened to her for close to 40 or 45 minutes, and I think that time gave me the right to ask her if I could tell her a story. And sometimes sharing the gospel with somebody is as easy as telling them a story. So I began the story that years ago, matter of fact, the first church that I pastored, and she immediately looked up, "You were a pastor?" And I explained a little bit about the type of churches that I had pastored. But I shared with her that in the church that I had pastored, there were these two dear, sweet elderly ladies, Edna Queen and Irene Leapline, and they were sisters. And they had a cousin who was in his 80s, and he was in the hospital, and he was very ill. And they asked me to go visit their cousin Jim, and they warned me, "He probably won't like you because you're a preacher, but would you go visit him?" And I said that I would. So I went to the hospital, and I visited Jim, and I'm telling the lady at the RV dealership this story, and it's given me the opportunity to share the gospel of Christ. So I shared the story of my encounter with Jim, and that Jim and I immediately became friends. He got out of the hospital. He was dying. He was on hospice care, but we became friends. And I would visit him in his home, and that even a couple times I got on his riding lawnmower and I mowed his yard for him. And there was one Sunday afternoon that I felt particularly inclined to visit Jim because we were leaving on vacation later that day after Sunday evening church, that I really thought I really need to tell Jim the story about Jesus. So I went to Jim's home, and he had a wonderful, beautiful wife that had been married 60 years, an elegant lady, and it kind of amazed me how this crusty old coal miner had such an elegant wife named Elizabeth. But I went and I visited Jim, and I said, "Jim, I'd like to tell you the story about Jesus." And so I told Jim how Jesus was God's son, and how God had sent Jesus to the earth to pay the penalty for man's sins, and that if we place our faith and trust in Jesus Christ, that God can forgive us of our sins, that we've all sinned, we've all come short of the glory of God, and we all need the Redeemer in order for us to have a home in heaven. And sometimes when people are coming to the end of their life, heaven becomes more of a stark reality to them, and such was the case for Jim. And so I told Jim the story about Jesus, the gospel of Jesus, and in telling the lady the story that I told Jim, I was getting the story out to this lady.
Yeah, let me just interrupt you here for just a second, because I want our listeners to get this. You have been in conversation with this lady for 45 minutes, and kind of frustrating, because I believe you told me that you really couldn't a complete sentence was hard to understand. A lot of what you gleaned was just through sitting there listening to her, and it was difficult. It was difficult to understand. And at the same time, you're ready to be on the road. You're working your job. You're trying to get through things, and then the door opens, and you literally tell her a story about your life. And in the midst of that story is the gospel message itself. So you're not telling her the gospel story. You're telling her a story with the gospel in the story.
That's true. And I think sometimes what we need to think about when we do, and I'll complete my story in just a moment, is when we tell people a story, it makes us a less threatening threat to them because we're not putting them on the hot seat, but yet the gospel's getting out. So I've told Jim the story of Jesus, and at a point I asked Jim, does that make any sense to you? And here's a man in his 80s. And he said, well, it does, Pastor Ned. He said, when I was a little boy, which goes back more than 70 years, I went to Vacation Bible School, Jim tells me. And when I was in Vacation Bible School, they told me that story. And I remember asking Jesus Christ into my heart then.
Wow.
To be perfectly honest with you, that just blew my mind. And I said, well, Jim, I said, you know, if you accepted Jesus Christ, he's never left you. And he's never forsaken you, and your home in heaven was secure the day you asked him into your heart, and he's kept that place waiting for you. And Jim, that just comforts my heart so much to hear that. Would you mind if I told your sweet cousins, Irene and Edna, that you know Jesus as your Savior? And he said, oh, by all means, please do. Well, I saw that, and peace had come upon Jim's face and letting him know that the security there was still for him in Jesus. I was so thrilled in my heart, but I looked up and I saw tears running down his sweet wife's face. And I said, Elizabeth, what are you thinking? And she said, I've never asked Jesus into my heart. Well, here's another occasion where God just slaps you up alongside of the face. And I'm telling the lady in Florida this story. And so I say, Elizabeth, you've just heard me tell Jim the story about Jesus. And Jim had recognized in his life he'd accepted Jesus as his Savior. And yet you've never accepted Jesus. Would you like to ask Jesus Christ into your heart right now? And Elizabeth said, I really would, but I don't know how. And I said, well, Elizabeth, it's just as simple as acknowledging what the scriptures tell us, that we recognize that we're sinners and that God has sent Jesus Christ to our planet to pay the price for man's sin. And if we put our faith and trust in Jesus, God will give us a home in heaven, and he will forgive us of our sins. And Elizabeth prayed that prayer and asked Jesus Christ into her heart. And then the sweetest thing happened when she completed that prayer. I was sitting on a sofa a short distance away from them. They were across a small room from me, sitting in two chairs side by side. And when Elizabeth finished that prayer, the old crusty bird Jim, who was sick and dying, reached over and grabbed his precious wife's hand, looked at her and said, I love you. And Elizabeth looked at me and she said, over 60 years of marriage, I think that's the first time that he ever told me that he loved me. Well, 35 years ago, or however long it was ago, that I sat in their home and I shared with them that story, and that little dynamic of that conversation came up. I love you. And then she says, I never remember him saying that. Little did I know that 35 years later, when a lady's sitting across from me in an RV dealership in Florida, God was going to let her say to me that she doesn't recall her husband ever saying, I love you. But when she said that to me, that story of Jim and Elizabeth immediately came to my mind, and I was able to share the gospel of Jesus with a lady in Florida because of an event that had taken place 35 years ago outside of Dunbar, Pennsylvania.
And I'm getting teary-eyed because I know the people that you're talking about, and it's such a sweet story in and of itself. And yet, this is the thing. You've told a story to us and our listeners of a story within a story. And at the same time, you not only shared Christ with Jim and Elizabeth, you shared it to this precious lady who was listening to you, and now you've shared it with all of our listeners in a way that's engaging. It's a story within a story within a story. And God uses that. God used that. As you said, 35 years later, he used that incident in your life to share it with someone else so that they could hear the gospel in a way, maybe for the first time where they're listening and they actually hear it.
And sometimes I think we overlook opportunities, and maybe on another day this week I can share with you a wonderful story that took place in a hotel balcony in Nepal with a young man named Mohan.
Oh, yes, that is an awesome story, and I hope that we do get to it this week, because that is another quote-unquote evangelism story. And here's the thing, listeners, as we talk about this, again, if you're overwhelmed with the thought of, I don't know the Bible, I don't know, what if I say something wrong? What if they ask me a question I don't know? What do I do about that? What's your response to someone who feels that way or is thinking that way?
I think sometimes we put way too much pressure on ourselves. We give God way too little credit for what he can do. And we need to understand that salvation to anyone's life, a salvation that has come to our life, and if as a listener today you know that you have a home in heaven because of your relationship with Jesus Christ, praise God. But God worked a miracle in your life when you accepted Jesus Christ. God works a miracle in anyone's life when they accept Jesus Christ. It's not up to us to perform the miracle of their salvation. That's a work that's entirely up to God. And I think our responsibility, as a matter of fact, I know our responsibility is simply planting the seed and sharing the truth. God has given us a wonderful truth to share. He's given us a wonderful truth to share, whether it's how he has come into our life, how he has blessed our life, what he has done with us, or how we have seen him work in the lives of others. All those are stories. And I think that when our listeners understand that it's a matter of being able simply to share the story, and it's not a me telling you how you can have a relationship with Jesus and you need to do that or you need to do this. There are some people that are gifted to share the gospel in those ways. And some people really need to be hit over the head with that sledgehammer because of how God is working in their heart or life or issues that they faced in the past. But I think many people are like me. They find themselves not gifted necessarily with the gift of evangelism, but yet wanting to share the light of the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ. And so if I could say one thing in closing this section with our listeners this morning, it's just recognize, share the light. Share something that is true. Share something that you know is true or that's happened to you or you've seen happen in the lives of others. You're not putting the onus of responsibility upon your listener to react in a certain way. And we need to feel free to let them respond and react in the way that they can before their God.
So real quick, let's finish the story. We have just a minute here or so. What was the lady's response to the story that you told her?
Well, interestingly, a salesman had come up, I'm ready for you now. And she said, wait, he's telling me a story.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So she was obviously listening. Now, I'm assuming she didn't pray a sinner's prayer. You didn't lead her to Christ right there. I don't know.
No, but we left with peace on our hearts.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, and I love that. I love the whole story and the whole thing that you've shared today, because it says that you actually did your responsibility. You fulfilled your duty, so to speak. But it's also a thrill to your own heart to know that God would use you in such a way and be his vessel.
That's a blessing in itself.
That's a blessing. And listener, if God has to kind of smack you upside the head and open your eyes to an opportunity, hey, step out in faith and take it. Share what's happened to you. Share what you know about Jesus because of your experience with him. And God will do amazing things. Hey, we're going to be back tomorrow with more on this subject of evangelism and what that looks like and how we can encourage one another in it and how we can sort of practice it and learn to grow in it. Hey, thanks for joining us here in the Circle of Friends. You have found a place to belong.
This program was brought to you through the generous support of donors and listeners like you. To contact Circle of Friends Ministries, you can write to P.O. Box 345, Berlin, Ohio, 44610, or find us on Facebook at circleoffriends.fm. Program archives can be found at thelight959.com.